Here we are once again with another Battlebots Champions review! The Golden Bolt tournament is getting closer and closer, and the fights are getting more and more tense. This one was definitely an interesting one, as in this episode we had some great robots, including Battlebots veterans like Lucky and Overhaul. We had Cobalt, which is now being manned by John Maladnik, and the always mighty Lucky. So with that all in mind, I was definitely curious to see how some of these fights were going to go. So let's not waste any more time, let's do this! Now onto the tournament itself, and it's an exciting one. Banshee versus Cobalt, Imulfire versus Shrederator, Lucky versus Overhaul, and Jackpot versus Big Dill. All but one of these I felt had a foregone conclusion to its winner, but I still was excited to see how they played out, as it was either going to be some impressive wins for those foregone conclusions, or I was going to be thrown for a loop with some exciting upsets. And in our first fight, it was Banshee versus Cobalt. Now, for this one, I was definitely leaning towards Cobalt for this one, as Banshee, while I think it's pretty cool, if Cobalt gets under Banshee, well, we've seen what Cobalt can do to Lucky. But Cobalt also can struggle if flipped as before, so I knew that there was still room for an upset. Banshee, in a decision that shocked me, decided to get rid of any chance of having forks or wedgelets, though in fairness this was to beef up the armour. It's something that on one hand I understand, but on the other hand I could see being a largely detrimental decision, because on one hand Banshee is going to be able to endure more punishment, but on the other hand Banshee has also given up a major way of getting under Cobalt. That is definitely a risk-reward thing, and I was curious to see how this would pay off for Banshee. Especially as Cobalt came out with their piano keys to assist them with ground clearance. Now the match begins, and Banshee comes rushing over, but soon begin dancing around as Cobalt begins to death hum, trying to get a good position in with the vertical spinner. Cobalt does get a small dig in, but then they soon send Banshee flying with two almighty shots, taking out a light in the process. Banshee does flip back, but are clearly experiencing some issues as Cobalt gets another dig in. Banshee tries to go for a flip, as Cobalt is definitely a lot more apprehensive under John Maladnik, but they miss, and the next time they clash, Cobalt makes another massive shot, ripping a piece off of Banshee. The next clash has a small dig from Cobalt, but Banshee returns the favour with a nice flip. It's then that I noticed that Cobalt's keys, which I had seen, were bending. They were really bent actually now. I've noticed this with piano keys. While I'm sure they're great because they're lightweight and you can throw a lot of them on if you're trying to get under opponents, it feels like a lot of them are really quite flimsy. Banshee gets another nice lift in from behind, and with Cobalt's timid driving, it seemed like the deadly spinner was potentially going to let a win go. They do end the match getting some nice digs in and push Banshee around the box though, as the fight goes to 3 minutes and to the judges. Now in the end the fight still went to Cobalt, but I had to say, Banshee did get a bit more in than I'd expected in this fight, given the setup that Banshee went for, and given that they were fighting Cobalt. As I felt Cobalt was just a bit too hesitant in this one, though at the same time this is understandable given that, you know, John, as he self-admits, is still getting used to all the unique intricacies of Cobalt. Yeah, obviously vertical spinners have the gyro to work with to start off with, and Cobalt's spinner is so far back that you can't use it like you would most vertical spinners where it's front and center. On the flip side, I gotta give some kudos to Banshee as well for managing to keep on going. That choice of additional armor definitely helped them out in this one. It did have me wondering if maybe they were going to walk away with the win in this encounter. Wasn't to be, but hey, it's always nice when these fights keep me guessing. Now as for the fight itself, it wasn't too amazing, as while it did have these amazing moments like I mentioned, it definitely didn't reach the heights I expected. You know, Cobalt, like I said, was just a bit too timid, and Banshee didn't get as many flips as I would have hoped. So, not a bad fight, but nothing that I would go crazy to watch again. After that, we had Jackpot versus Big Dill. And this one I was struggling to figure out who might win. On one hand, Jackpot seems like the obvious choice with the powerful spinner that can send a robot flying, but on the other hand, Big Dill Spinner has proved to be quite nice, and they could absolutely gain control depending on how the driving would go. Plus, with this being a rougher season for Jackpot than usual, this fight was exciting as both seemed just as capable of winning here. Now Big Dill comes out with their forks, spinner, and a little minibot with a vert of its own. Jackpot meanwhile looks good with its lifting forks and that single massive spinner, Blackheart. The fight begins and Big Dill wastes no time racing over with a box rush and lifts Jackpots repeatedly, flipping them over. Though they end up getting a fork stuck in the process, meaning that Jackpot has the opportunity to get away, come back and land a massive shot, which ends up doing some critical damage to Big Dill, taking out the weapon and one half of their drive. With that, Jackpot are able to break away, get up to speed, hit again before going to terrorize the minibot as Big Dill slowly crab walks over. Jackpot rushes in, but Big Dill does manage to lift them up in the air. Even with crab walking, Big Dill is still ready to bring a fight here. Jackpot soon gets another shot in before the two bots clash, though Jackpot ends up punting away the minibot for the second time in the fight. Just for the minibot to come back in from off screen. This minibot will not die. Now for a moment I thought both robots had actually managed to break down as a bit of smoke appeared, but Jackpot soon broke away, began spinning up once again, but Big Dill kept on them. Jackpot's spinner is definitely not doing as well as it did in the beginning, as it did seem like it was a bit dodgy, and it only continues to be rough for Jackpot as the pulverizer starts repeatedly smacking them. Jackpot does get some more small digs in as the two play cat and mouse with each other, with Big Dill soon getting a hold and pushing them around the box as smoke begins to rise in greater and greater amounts. With that, the fight goes once again to the judges. This one was another exceptionally close fight, but the judges ultimately chose Jackpot as the winner, which I absolutely do agree with in the end, as ultimately the damage they did was substantial. For me, I would have tossed a coin personally on which one I thought was going to win. Honestly, I quite like this fight. It was a great battle to the bitter end between these two, and yeah, I had fun with it. After that, we got Imulfire versus Captain Shrederator, and, okay, beyond the potential for an upset, I had a feeling that this fight was going to ultimately end up going Imulfire's way. I've been saying all season how Imulfire, while they don't seem to yet have a solid answer for vertical spinners, absolutely has one for horizontals in its design with that strong wedge. So taking on Captain Shrederator seemed like an easy W for the Bots FC spinner. Now Shrederator comes out with that weird fork dustpan thing called the Talons of Freedom, which they use to help them with ground clearance, while Imulfire comes out with that lovely wedge to absorb damage. Now I gotta ask, I genuinely would love someone to explain to me how well the Talons of Freedom could work, because the whole thing of adding like a wedge like that to a full body spinner, there seems to be so many things that go through my head, like, wouldn't that, obviously that would reduce the bite, right? But at the same time, would it get under opponents? Like, I don't know, like that seems like there's a lot of different things. It's definitely experimental, and I don't know, like it doesn't seem like something that would really work in my opinion, but also I'm not a builder, so I'd love to hear you all sound off in the comments. Anyway, the match begins, and Imulfire rushes right over, landing some notable shots, but soon one clash causes Imulfire to flip over. Still Imulfire returns, and the two exchange blows. Imulfire then runs into disaster though, as one side of their drive stops working. Both robots are spinning hard, but the hesitancy of Shrederator, given that they could get obliterated if they go about this wrong, and the crab walking of Imulfire means that there's no action for a really prolonged period of time, in my opinion, until the referee straight up just tells them they need to fight. And we do get some small hits reluctantly from Shrederator, with each clash being spaced out, likely as they knew hitting a weak spot was going to be near enough impossible. Soon after those clashes, Shrederator's spinner then stops working. So the tentative clashes continue as Shrederator is just not going to risk getting involved when they've got no way of really doing anything to Imulfire. And it seems part of that isn't even really their choice, as it seemed that they might have gotten stuck on the kill saws. I don't really know for certain, but they just did not want to get involved. I can't blame them necessarily, because what were they going to do at this point? But at the same time, the match goes to the judges, who give it to Imulfire. And yeah, that fight was pretty bad. I tried to cut some slack, as not every fight will be a classic. You have to temper your expectations, you know. I'm not expecting a fight from Imulfire and Shrederator to be, say, on the level of the Huge versus Sawblaze fight. That just wouldn't be realistic, that wouldn't be reasonable. Imulfire is brand new to the heavyweights, you know, Shrederator is an old classic design that's been having it a bit rough in recent times. It wouldn't be fair to judge on that same pedestal, but man, this fight, it started off kind of interesting, but after that initial exchange, it kind of fell off a cliff, and I just expected a short but sweet spinner clash, but I didn't really get that, as obviously with that apprehension from Brian Nave's team, from the Shrederator team, coupled with Imulfire's drive half-die, meaning that they couldn't do much of anything, meant that the clashes quickly became too few and far between. This one, massively disappointing. Next up, we got Lucky versus Overhaul. We got more of a control fight here. Safe to say, I was backing Lucky in this. I think Overhaul is cool, but Lucky has been better than ever, and I just didn't see Overhaul bouncing back enough to win this fight. Lucky comes out with their usual wedgelet design to help them scrape the ground. Overhaul, meanwhile, comes out with some nice forks as always to help with ground clearance. The match begins, and both robots are slow out before they begin jockeying for position. Lucky getting a good wedge in, but no flip, followed by Overhaul trying for a lift with Lucky getting away. Soon Overhaul gets a better but still insubstantial lift in my opinion. Lucky then comes in for a few flip attempts, missing the first few as they pin Overhaul into the wall, but soon they send Overhaul up and over, and Overhaul's drive seems to be suffering, so Lucky begins flipping them all over the box and up onto the shelf. Overhaul is running away at this point as Lucky is hunting them down, though this is clearly tactful by Overhaul as they manage to get around and get some nice lifts in. But they can't do a whole lot with it as Lucky quickly breaks away and returns the favour with a flip to Overhaul. Lucky keeps going, sending Overhaul flipping and flying, though in a concerning display, Lucky does begin to smoke. Still, every time Overhaul even gets close, Lucky sends them flying away and manages to hold them off as the match goes the distance. The judges, of course, give the fight to Lucky, which I 110% agree with. Now, again, acknowledging the robots that are in the fight, I expected a fight where we get some good flips and some decent lifts, and while I felt Overhaul's lifts left a little bit to be desired at points, based on how it has shown control in the past, both robots still gave a pretty good performance, with Lucky being as aggressive and great as ever in my opinion, even when it was having some drive issues, so I'd say I was pretty happy with the match overall. Next up, we had a battle of the vertical spinners as it was Cobalt versus Imulfire, and I'll admit I wasn't as hyped for this as I'd like. Both our robots I think are pretty nice and have lots of potential in them, but Imulfire is struggling with this being their rookie season, especially as getting as low as possible is one of their big kryptonites right now. And on the other side, Cobalt, John Maladnik is still getting used to the robot, and while I'm sure he'll get used to it, it seemed like a tall ask to expect him to have mastered the robot by what I believe was their third fight for him. Cobalt comes out with their piano keys once again, while Imulfire, much like Banshee, has given up on having any forks or wedgelets to try and just become a reach spinner, which is an interesting tactic, trying to pull a death roll, which has proven for death roll to be quite a useful strategy. Now the fight begins, and both robots are cautiously moving out as they get their spinners up to speed. Imulfire starts off with some initial hits, then Cobalt gets a minor dig in. Imulfire starts dancing around as Cobalt stays held back. Soon there's some more sparks. Then with the next exchange, some more of Cobalt's piano keys come off, but Cobalt then takes one of the 4 tracks off in return. Then in another exchange, more of Imulfire starts coming off, including another track. Soon the two then have a mighty clash weapon to weapon, where Imulfire ends up under a pulverizer, stone dead. Honestly, given that John is still getting used to Cobalt and Imulfire had given up on ground clearance entirely, this actually wasn't too bad. Imulfire was aggressive and kept the fight entertaining, and of course Cobalt, when it got shots in, did a lot of damage, sending Imulfire flying pretty much every time they clashed. It was an explosive battle that managed to cover up some of the weaknesses of both robots, and yeah, that was better than expected. After this we got Jackpot versus Lucky. Now Jackpot needed to get some critical repairs done before the fight, while Lucky just needed really a top up apparently. And this would definitely had me wonder, combined with, the Cobalt's cautious driving and the fact that Jackpot could potentially break down, were we going to see a Lucky sweep? Still, of course, thankfully Jackpot was ready to go in time, so we were ready for our big fight. Now the battle begins with Lucky rushing over and easily getting under Jackpot as they keep their lifting arm in the air as they go the reach spinner method to start off with. While this looks bad at first, the Minibot ended up being really useful here, getting under Lucky and allowing Jackpot to get some big shots in. The Minibot is way stronger than I originally thought it would be, as it actually managed to push Lucky aside during this phase of attack from Jackpot. Lucky isn't out though, as they manage to flip Jackpot onto its side, where the weapon hits the wall, causing the belt to snap off in the process, disabling the weapon entirely. Lucky then decides to start bullying Jackpot around the box onto the shelf. Then when getting down, they shove Jackpot under the pulverizer. Then, for a long period of time, they keep on Jackpot, flipping and pinning Jackpot for as long as they can, and soon we can see why, as when Jackpot finally gets away, Lucky can barely move in its position. Still, Jackpot doesn't do much of anything as the fight counts down and goes to the judges, and the judges gave the fight in a split decision to Jackpot. Honestly, I will admit I was a little surprised, as I expected Lucky suffocating Jackpot along with Jackpot's weapon break to be enough to swing the fight into a Cobalt vs Lucky rematch. But at the same time, I imagine the way the pin was going with not much active weapon use, while great control from Lucky, might not have been seen as too aggressive due to Battlebots needing active weapon usage. So I can definitely see how this close battle went the way that it did. Still a fun fight, even if it was incredibly tense at the end. Now before the main event, they do show off the latest robot from Mark Satrakian. It's a complex walker robot that, as always expected from Mark, is an absolute wonder. This thing is so well built. I think that it's good that Mark doesn't put the bots in the Battlebots anymore, because these things have always been such wonders from Mark. They're so amazingly well built and complex. It would break my heart to see them get drawn up against a robot like Endgame or Riptide or Minotaur. That would be absolutely tragic. Anyway, it's time for the grand final. Heading into this, I normally would back Cobalt all the way with that dangerous weapon, but while John is adapting as quickly as he can, I know how dangerous Jackpot can be, so I wasn't sure if Cobalt would be ready for such a hard-hitting encounter. This is definitely going to be one of the toughest to date for the new era of Cobalt. Now the main event begins. Both robots are slow at the beginning as they get up to speed, as they both dance around, trying to find the optimal position, leading to a tense moment of build-up. Cobalt, though, ends up getting caught by the Minibot in an impressive bit of driving, as Jackpot manages to get in from behind one of the major weak spots of Cobalt with a mega hit, embedding the weapon deep into Cobalt, and we get to see the Fog of War! Apparently you can take Cobalt away from the Robot Wars team, but you can't take the Robot Wars away from Cobalt, as that was absolutely amazing. It ends up filling the battle box quite quickly, meaning that they managed to get right into the batteries. Still, as Cobalt catches on fire, there is another issue. Jackpot is stuck! Still, Jackpot somehow turns this into a way to turn things around even more as they begin ramming Cobalt into a wall to separate them. Jackpot does continue to go after Cobalt, with somehow both weapons spinning despite everything that just happened, as Cobalt gets a small shot in. After a small glancing blow from Jackpot in the side, Cobalt finally stops though, seemingly realising, oh yeah, I shouldn't be alive. With the flame burning oh so bright as they are counted out, giving Jackpot the win in this Sin City slugfest. I gotta say, this fight was a lot of fun. There isn't much John could have done after just a single driving mistake, as he himself admitted, which Jackpot absolutely took advantage of. The fact that both robots were still spinning after that though, was genuinely incredible to witness, as obviously Cobalt surviving that was a miracle in and of itself, and typically I found that, and of course Jackpot getting its spinner stuck, that can sometimes spell the end for a spinner as well, as they can burn themselves out. But also the spectacle of Cobalt on fire has to be up there as one of the iconic Battlebots champions shots. Like, you think about the likes of Hypershock hitting Gigabyte where it just cracks in two, or, you know, the amazing shot from Glitch to Rotator. I would have to add Cobalt's massive blazing fire to that, in my opinion. That was amazing. It was so good. And I also have to say, I'm extremely impressed with how well the battle plan of Jackpot ended up in this fight. Minibots struggle at the best of times to get involved without ending up as shrapnel, and this one actually ended up deciding the fight. The team should be absolutely proud of how that fight went. Overall, this episode was full of highs and lows. John Maladnik still isn't at David Mold's level with Cobalt, but we also saw some major improvement happen in real time, and given that Cobalt was a genuine threat to win the entire time, shows that when everything finally clicks in time for World Championship 8, they're likely to be extremely dangerous. Jackpot, of course, winning the entire thing was great to see, as the bot had a rough start in World Championship 7, but it seems that they, much like the other Sin City Slugfest winners, is back on the rebound here with some smart tactics and of course their killer weapon power. While some of the fights had a little to be desired, it still overall was a fairly fun episode in my opinion. Big Deal, Imulfire, Lucky and Banshee all in my opinion showed that they'll be ones to keep an eye on in the next season in my opinion, as well as the two finalists. So while the episode does have its weak points, I'd say that there is still enough that you probably should check it out if you can. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this Battlebots review, and if you did, please be sure to leave a like on this video. Subscribe if you haven't already, and be sure to hit that notification bell to be notified of future videos on the channel. And if you become a member, you'll get access to custom emotes as well as exclusive videos, including some bonus reviews. If you can also share this video around with your friends, that'd be super appreciated because it would get more eyes on the channel. Though anything you do is always appreciated. Thank you so much for checking out this video and watching it this far. But from the recording session, it turns out this is probably going to be a little bit longer than usual. But with that being said, I'll see you all next time. Bye guys!